Hey doing everyone, welcome back. Well, you've probably heard about, the tariffs that are going into effect or have gone into effect. Or I don't even think Donald Trump himself knows what the hell's going on with it. He sure as hell doesn't know what he's doing. Uh, we have a minimum of 10% tariff on pretty much everyone in the world, including Herndon McDonald Island, which is inhabited only by penguins. And then there's another island off of Greenland, which is inhabited only by polar bears. So we're tariffing penguins and we're tariffing polar bears at 10%. Why? I don't know. But, we're also tariffing everybody else. In fact, I think it was Lesotho was the highest at 50%. And I think he just bumped China's up to 50% because, he threw that 34% tariff on China, and China responded by, you know what? Cool, let's throw a 34% tariff on you. So, you hit first, you get hit back. I don't know. He's being a bully, basically. He said that if anybody responds, we're going to raise our tariffs. Well, you know what? When I was a kid in school and you had the bully on the schoolyard, the bully would basically say, you know what? Don't hit back or it's going to be worse. But you hit back and the bully usually backs down. It may take a few hits to make that happen. It may take a few hits to make that happen, but the bully will eventually back down. I hope. I hope he's smart enough to back down. I mean, this is, in terms of numbers, it is worse than Smoot-Hawley of 1930. Senator Reed Smoot of Utah and Representative Willis Hawley of Oregon. They made up a tariff plan. The idea was to get us out of the Great Depression, which, as you all know, that was triggered by the 1929 stock market crash. But it was severely exacerbated by the tariffs. It may not have gone nearly as poorly as it did had it not been for the tariffs. So, and that, they took a 13.5% tariff on average, or 13.7. I actually have the number here, I think. I wrote it down. They took a 13.5 average tariff on other countries, and they raised it to an average of 20%. And President Hoover was warned by the economists at the time, don't sign this. It's going to make it worse. Hoover signed it. Made it worse. And it's kind of frustrating because old Herb happened to be from my home state of Iowa. So, we get stuck with the guy responsible for the Great Depression. Right. Now, the average tariffs that America had prior to Donald Trump, on average, we had about 3% tariffs on everything. Right? Now, we have a minimum of 10% tariffs on pretty much everybody. But when you factor in Lesotho and another country that I can't think of off the top of my head at 50%, and then you've got, a bunch of Asian countries that are in the 40s, and 20 for the European Union, and 25 each on Canada, Mexico, South Korea, 24 on Japan. You figure all that out, and we come out to actually a 22.7% average. That's the average tariff that on imports to America. right? Now, what does that do for you and me? You drive a car? Yeah, I do. I'm sure most, if not all of you do, right? Let's take a look at some cars here, shall we? Actually, before we look at cars, right? Before we look at cars, let's take a look at the smartphone that you may be watching this video on, right? A smartphone. Let's just say an average price of a smartphone is $750, right? That seems about right. More than likely it's coming from China, right? So with the 34% tariff, that $750 phone is now going up to $1,005. That's roughly a $250 increase, right? Now, because China matched the 34% tariff, Trump says he's raising it to 50%. In which case, that smartphone is now $1,125, which is an increase of $375. So, great idea, huh? It's a tax on you. It is. It's a tax on you. Now, let's get into cars, right? Because everybody drives a car, right? And contrary to popular belief, there are no American-made cars. I mean, yes, there are cars made here, but how many are completely made here? Nope. None. Now, keep in mind, I'm talking about just the finished car itself, right? Not factoring in the components or anything like that, right? Let's take a look at, and I'm going by the order of the tariffs, with a 20% tariff on the European Union, right? And I just took the least expensive model that I could find, just base model, starting MSRP, right? For Volkswagen, Toyota, Mazda, Honda, Subaru, Nissan, Kia, Hyundai, Jeep, Chevy, and Ford. Okay? Volkswagen Jetta, the starting MSRP, is, and I rounded these off, so just to make the math easy, right? So, Volkswagen Jetta, roughly $22,500, roughly. At a 20% tariff, that car now goes up to $27,000. That's a $4,500 increase, right? And, you may be thinking, well, I'm going to finance it anyway. Hey, sure, for a higher payment. For a higher payment. Now, let's take a look at the Japanese cars, right? Let's just assume that they're all made in Japan, which I know a lot of them are built here, but a lot of stuff actually comes from Japan, right? So, let's take a look first at the Nissan Versa, because that is the least expensive car on the entire list, actually. Starts out at roughly $17,000. The only car that I looked at here that is under 20. Not after that 24% tariff. It is now $21,080. Let's look now at the Subaru Impreza, which has a starting price of $23,500. That Subaru just went up by almost $6,000, almost. Went up, well, about 5.5. It's now $29,140. And then the other three, they all have basically the same. Again, I rounded them off. The same basic MSRP starting point. The Toyota Corolla, the Mazda 3 sedan, and the Honda Civic. Each starts out at about $24,000, which means that each of those is now $29,760, an increase of over $5,500. Yeah, more like $5,700. Great. So much for affordable cars for a lot of people, huh? What about Kia and Hyundai? 25% tariffs on South Korea, right? And these are both Korean-made cars. We're going to look at the least expensive Hyundai Venue. Starts at about $20,000, right? With a 25% tariff, you're now paying $5,000 more, $25,000. Roughly the same thing with the Kia Soul. $20,500 is roughly the starting price. Now goes up to $25,625. Okay. Chevy Trax. Is that made in Canada, made in Mexico? You can probably, you might have more knowledge on that than I do. I don't think it's made here in the United States. But same thing. It starts out at about $20,500, 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, goes up to $25,625, right? And keep in mind, probably more than that because the parts cross the borders multiple times. So the American-made vehicles are even more complex to figure out, right? So I just did this for the sake of making things easy, right? Just assuming that it's currently made in either Mexico or Canada and then sent here. Okay? And it's not that simple. What about Ford? Ford's least expensive vehicle is the Maverick. The Maverick is about $24,000 starting MSRP. 25% tariff, $30,000. Nice, huh? And of course, the most expensive of the least expensive vehicles is the Jeep Compass, which already starts out at $27,000, right? So it's already more expensive than five of these after the tariffs. But yeah, that shoots up to $33,750. $33,750. So, granted, there's not a whole lot of cars that are out there for under $20,000. I found the Nissan Versa, and I think probably Mitsubishi and maybe Suzuki make a couple that are under 20. They won't be. They won't be. And some of the other vehicles, imagine your average car. Your average car is probably about $35,000 to $40,000. Right. Increase that by anywhere from 20 to 25%. Yeah. And that's assuming that that's all the manufacturers raise the price by. Good luck with that. Hopefully we get this thing fixed soon and this doesn't really affect us as much, but I am not optimistic. I'll see you next time.